All right, welcome back to Sharp Night Live here in Canterbury, New Hampshire. Tonight, I'm going to talk about jigs and one particular jig for making curved legs for a small table, or jigs for a small table like this, a classic shaker candle stand. So we're not going to get so heavy into it that, but I do want you to see how some techniques that you may or may not have seen prior to this on chairs and things like that, how they can apply to small projects, make them really efficient and fun to crank out a bunch of them. You know, it's good when you get a small project like this because it's not overwhelming and you can actually make, you know, a dozen of them or 6 at a time, you know, and not kill yourself, but enjoy the process and get to the finish line much sooner. So anyway, I just want to remind you, if you enjoy this content, go ahead and subscribe. That helps us. And also to ring the bell, and you won't miss any of the new content when we have it coming up. And also check out epicwoodworking.com. That's where you really get to be an insider to things that are going on. Some of you have seen some of the jigs that I've made before to make legs and things more quickly. One of the most, if you've been around a little while, you've seen where we've made this Craftsman chair. This actually is on the website with the plans and the video course. You can take this course. And in that course, I go through this process where we make a jig to shape this leg, and very efficiently and accurately. And we do that off of having the pattern. Now, I don't have the pattern with me for this chair leg, but the pattern looks a lot like this. It looks actually just like the profile of this leg. When I build a jig like this, the material gets rough sawn on the bandsaw. So after you've bandsawed, you still have a lot of cleanup to do. And that's one of the things that takes some time. And at Pugmore's, when I was apprenticing, we never used these kind of jigs. We did everything by hand, and it wasn't actually that, it wasn't that bad. You just normalized it. But we were usually using mahogany, which is a kind of a very agreeable, nice wood to work. Here we got white oak, and it's helpful to have a jig, especially if you need to build, say, 12 chairs. That's a lot of legs, a lot of cleaning up. And then you also get a lot more uniformity to the materials that you shape. So anyway, the way the jig works in general is it's bandsawn. And when it's bandsawn, it's a little oversized, almost by 1/8 of an inch. So it's set into this jig to clean it up, to run it at the router table with a flush bearing router bit to ride against here that reproduces this shape. So this surface right here was created with the original pattern. So the pattern's just tacked to this. A flush bearing straight router bit is run along the pattern, and it shapes this Baltic birch exactly to that profile. So this is 1/2 inch Baltic birch. It's nice for the jig platform. Now when I set this up, I set these stops here about a 1/16 of an inch back. And I do that just with spacers. Like when the template is on here and it's flush, these blocks get applied with a little 16-inch spacer so that on the second cut, that material that filled up that 1/16 of an inch space over here is now overhanging for the second cut on the back. And then this is run on the router table and it cuts it flush, and you end up with really nice uniform chair legs, and pretty quickly you get a nice shape here. So that's a good method for getting out basic chair legs. But I want to just show you while I'm talking about that. I know I've never shown you this, but this came out of the library upstairs.
These look like snowboards.
Yeah. But this is the same principle as the jig, except I stole the toggle clamps off of this for that, and so that's why they're missing. But this had all the toggle clamps, and this was the Queen Anne chair, the back leg jig. How did I know that? And that leg, it's very similar. I mean, of course, it's a lot more souped up version here, a lot more curves to it, but this is one of those actual legs. So look at how that is. It's just because it's curved, it's not any more complicated in a way than that simple craftsman style chair. But this sits right in there, and a flush bearing cuts the front. So none of this is rounded over yet, and none of that joinery is made yet. It just flush cuts this nice curve. And this tenon isn't on there either. That's the first cut, and then you come over and you hit the second cut, and you get a nice leg like that you're ready to shape. Now, this came in really handy because I think we did a set of 16 Queen Anne chairs out of these, and so that's a lot of legs, and it made it a lot nicer. In fact, this is an extra one, so you can see this is the same leg. This would actually be the right side leg. Check that out. See, you ever wonder what's behind in here? Well, there's actually a tenon, and you have to map this out with the drawing that the tenon is well inside, so that as this curves up, the tenon is off the inside of this, what starts out to be quite a wide piece, almost 2 inches, I think. And then, so all that's pre-cut, and then it's sawn out to shape and rounded, and then glued up, and then all this is kind of sculpted and shaped in. So yes, there is a lot more complexity and curvatures to this chair. It's pretty demanding in terms of chair making experience, but it's just one or two steps beyond the craftsman chair. So let's get on with this. I'm going to show you this cool little jig, and this one has a little difference. Now, notice on these legs how one of the beautiful subtle details about this table is the way, all these nice curves kind of relate. They're subtle here, but you notice the top of the leg has a very subtle radius on it. That radius is actually established by the radius of the column. So when I join these together, they start out, let me show you this. These are two different woods, but you can see when it gets joined in, this is white oak and this is curly maple. But that would get joined in and hit the column. But I would take a pencil and trace the radius of the column onto the top of the leg. And then that line is brought all the way down the sides. And quite often I would just do it by hand with spoke shave, rasps. So you trace that and it would create the radius going down the column. Over here, you can see how that happens. So that little subtle detail is beautiful, the way I don't know how nice the camera picks it up, but it's a really nice soft radius that goes right down to the floor. But that takes time, First you gotta clean up your bandsawing, create the radius, and then it all gets blended in, and it's worth it. It's worth it, but it does take a little time. So I was making a series of these tables, and I thought I wanted to come up with a way to make these a little faster using my master pattern, the final pattern which that table was made from, and create a little jig process. So to do that, I'm going to first need to bandsaw some material. Now, when I make a table like this, very often, I want to get all 3 legs from the same board. This is a beautiful piece of curly maple. See how nice and curly that is on the edge? Are you picking up that curl? Can you see it?
In there close? We can?
I don't know.
Yes,
can you
there
see
we
it?
go. Yeah.
Okay. So it's a beautiful piece of curly maple. I love to have kind of like the same, make sure they're all of equal dynamic curl and color and all that for the finishing. So you want to get them out of the same board. Sometimes you can flip them and nest them, but I really do try to pick the best edge and get the most pop of the figure onto the tops of the legs if possible, because that's what you see with curly maple. And I might have several of these boards around that aren't from the same plank, so before I start machining them, I would just, these would all be numbered 1, or these 3 are going to be all A. That's the A table, all right? I'm not going to cut those, but here I've got a board. This has some beautiful curl too. Do you see that?
Yes.
Are you seeing it?
Yeah,
right there?
good. Yep.
And then this way? Mm-hmm. Okay, so this one I'm going to lay out a couple legs. I'll just saw one out. You always want to line these curved type of legs with the grain running as closely aligned with the curve as possible. That way the strength of the fibers, they're like strings, or they give it more rigidity by coming in this way. If you had a wide plank, you wouldn't want to put it this way because the grain is running this way and it would snap quite easily, all right? So you do have some places here where it's kind of steep, but just having that angle lends a bit more strength than having it going across. So this is a very common way of positioning legs like this, and then I get it on there, and I always use like a pen for this. It gives me a nice little margin, and it gives you a nice even line that you can see really well at the bandsaw. It all gets cut off, so no worries. Slope around there, and then right down there. Okay, and then I would put another one, nest it right in here, and right there. I'm finding it hard not to be distracted. It's such a beautiful time of year around here. Spring is in the air, and some of you know what I'm talking about when I say it's the first day of the Masters. I love that golf tournament. Probably one of my favorite sporting events all year. So if anybody's in Atlanta and wants to invite somebody down, the camera lady, no, you have no interest, right? But that would be awesome.
Oh, you weren't talking about me?
Oh, yeah, like you sit down and watch golf. So I got a couple legs drawn out here, and I'm going to just saw one out. Now, it's important when you have a jig, which I'm going to show you as I started making for this, that you leave the line, and you saw pretty smoothly, but you don't have to worry about being too smooth. But here we go. We're going to head over to the bandsaw right here. The light's too high. All right, here we go. Just zoom in. Sorry. This bandsaw, I like to keep it with a 3/8 blade and 6 teeth per inch. That seems like a nice, it can cut through a lot of material and it leaves a fairly smooth surface, but not smooth enough to go with, and you end up with little bumps on there. So you could use a drum and sand if you have a drum sander, or an oscillating type drum sander. Or you could also clean it up by hand, which takes a little longer, but it does give you a better result. Like a lot of times when I use drum sanders, they're kind of it depends how big the radius is and all that, but I'm trying to get a good smooth fluid thing here. I don't want it, I'm trying to take out any waves and bumps. It's a little tricky to do that with hand work like that. So here's 2 legs that are sawn out, and one I could clean it up either on some type of sander, or you could, let's see, that's got such a big radius that you really want to sand that with some type of drum. On the outside though, I want to make sure I have more fluidity there, so you can take it and put it in your vise and want to create kind of a nice flow there. So I could take a block plane, and by rolling it, look at that curl pop come out. I'm rolling it so it is planing. I'm not creating flats. And then I'm going to step in front for a second, and then I'm going to go back the other way because the grain is changing right here. That feels good. I always feel it like with my finger along the long way, you can feel the ripples more than if you just went like that. So I'm just trying to recreate a nice smooth surface. And then you come up in here, and you could either, a lot of times up in there, I will have traced the arc there, and so you can come in with I like these Nicholson rasps. And that really fares a nice curve pretty quickly. These things cut so nice. But I would have my guideline, I'd be doing this after I cut my joinery. But then once I got that all set, it takes a process where you make a center line. Like if you're going to do this subtly by hand, if you don't have there's not really router bits that get this exactly. There are some, and I would come like this and make that line down each side to kind of show the limits of the curve that I'm going to put on there. Like it'd be something like this, okay? A round over. And then once you have that, you're going to radius this by, I could use a spoke shave for this too. Now, I'm going to start radiusing by holding the spoke shave at an angle. Now, this is what you would do if you wanted to make it the old way, and enjoy the fact that you're not turning on a power tool, and you're not going to cut any digits off, You're going to enjoy it, right? You got some music on. Let's say the power goes out. You got to have this in your tool belt. You got to have this in your bag of tricks. So I'm holding this, and it's really fun. This actually would be a great thing to do with kids, Like you teach them how to hold the tool flat. You get a sharp edge, and it's a lot like peeling vegetables, except it's industrial size. If anyone's done any woodworking with kids, I'm curious if you have any favorite projects that you've done with kids.
Yes.
We've been thinking about that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. because it'd be nice to create some projects here and there that you could enjoy making with kids. I just don't want to overdo it. But I do believe this is kind of a nice one. This could be used also rather than spoke shaving, like I was starting to get a little tear out there. So with a curly figure. So with a rasp, you don't get that. You're avoiding it. And anyway, I would work my way along with the rasp and then with files. And basically, let me just go a little further than this so you can see how it starts to turn into a real leg, if you haven't seen this before. That was, this is the 49. This is a little rougher. See how you got to go with the grain. See, if I go the other way, it's cutting into the teeth and it's going to leave a rougher surface. These random teeth are just really beautiful. They create such a nice surface. So see, I'm going down on my line there, and then I won't take off the center line till right at the end. And then you could bring in the 50. And that's starting to have that subtle little roundover look. And then I like to, it's almost like going through sandpaper grits. I bring in the file. And the file just takes off that. And then you could card scrape, which takes that away, starts to clear it up again. Now, when I get to this point, I take off the center line. So I'm doing this to see it get clear and removing all those little scrape marks. Then I can reposition it.
Tom, are all rasps numbered? Dean's asking.
I'm not sure how the other brands rate. I'm assuming they are. Like the ones I've seen, I think the Aru, if that's the right name, has two coarsenesses. So this is the 49 and 50 are the way they number the Nicholson, the 49 being the more coarse. So that's what I would do, and I would come up in here and do the same with the rasps to round it right into the leg. And then you sand, and so you create that little radius that's really sweet. So you go through the process of bandsawing, truing up the curve, marking the curve, and running the radius. Hand shaping the radius. So you're probably saying, hey, this was supposed to be about jig making, right? And it is. And now I'm going to show you how to do the same thing with the jig process, okay? Here we go. I've got the jig that I made. Now look how fancy that is. You can see that I took the same pattern, and this, if I bump it against the stop, you can see there's extra room, there's material there. So that's going to leave an amount for the next cut, okay? So this has been sawn with, so I'm about a 16th oversized here. I left my pen line, so there's a little overhanging on each side. And that ends up being just right if you set it in against these stops, and then I'm going to lock down these toggles. These are like old-time toggles. Now I'm going to take it to the router table with the bearing on the bottom. This is the cutter that I'm going to use. So it has a bottom bearing, flush cutting, 3/4 inch diameter flush cut bit with a 1/2 inch shank. Now that bearing is low enough, it's going to ride against this shape at the bottom, and then the cutter is going to trim off everything overhanging. So I'll end up with a perfect profile of the bottom of my template. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Now, when I set up jigs, I always do it so I do it so that the least amount of material is cutting into the teeth. However, this one is right kind of a curve, so you've got the grain, you'll be cutting against the grain one way or the other. I usually cut with the grain on that delicate little foot so it doesn't blow out. So I'm going to be with the grain, the cutter's going to be spinning this way, see, kind of counterclockwise as you look down on it, it's upside down. And so it's going to be hitting into these fibers from this direction, and the grain's running that way, so it's going to be cutting in the agreeable direction right here, but then as we transition up into this area, it will be against the grain. But it's really not a problem because look how much I've got hanging over. So I have very little I'm going to skim off. That's why it's important to do a halfway decent job bandsawing so that you don't try to get too much off and you won't end up blowing it out here. All right, so here we go. I'm just going to come in here and start off the piece, so I don't want to hit it where the piece is overhanging. That's why I'm going to start off there so the bearing gets against my pattern, and then I'll start moving, so I'll start trimming. And I don't want to go too slow, I'll get burnout. Or I'll get burning. I'll get burnout, but the wood will just get burned. All right, so here we go. All right, so now we've got that. Now we have the beautiful cleaned up surface. We didn't have to do much at all. I could give that a quick card scrape and it would be beautiful and ready to sand. Now that is nicely shaped, and now I'm going to use that to reference off the other side of the jig. Now, normally I would just pop this, have the reverse setup where, like the other jigs, maybe on this one I don't have it on the same one, but this would reference, and I would then skim along and cut this side of the shape, which I did. Let's see. So I'm going to show you a jig that probably, I don't know, I'd never seen it before. I just made it up. So maybe it's not great. But I used... So now I wanted that other shape. Now you got to look at this and not... Okay, look at this thing. All right. It looks a little complicated, right? It's really not that complicated. It was built this way mainly because of the bit, and I'll show you that in a second. Now, this shape right here is identical to the top. I can't set it in there. Maybe I can set it behind so you can get the idea. Okay? That mirrors this shape right here. Before these toggle clamps were here, I had this tack there, and I cut this beautifully to shape because the bearing's going to ride on here. Then I put, imagine this isn't here, okay? This piece isn't here. Then I put these 3/4 inch thick blocks on the inside while this was tacked to that, like that, so that those blocks would reference off the nicely smoothed inside. See those blocks in there? So they sit right against that. And then I needed to cover it up with this other piece because of the way this cutter is shaped. Check this out. So rather than doing just a straight cutter and then having to round it over, I've got a bearing here, and it has the full radius. It has a nice soft radius. So that's why I had to build this way, like this height, so that when I pop this piece in, and it goes into my little jig, and I reference the foot right against the stop on the bottom, The other one I also referenced on the foot and bottom. And then I'm going to, these toggle clamps, I had to do it through, obviously, this because it's in the way. So I drilled those holes. And then these actually lock that piece down inside there. So now that bearing, that is going to ride right along the shape I want, while that arc underneath, that cove shape, is going to cut not only that smooth curved profile this way, but also the subtle radius on the top of the leg in one pass. Are you liking this now?
I'm thrilled.
Does anybody care?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay,
Yep.
good. All right, so I'm going to just
Bob
move this.
just said that's a cool jig.
It is, but it takes a little setting up. Like, so this is the kind of stuff you can make. Like, if you're going to bang out some small tables.
I'm sure I'm giving a good picture of the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, I forget where I actually found this cutter. I'm sorry I don't have this. But this is kind of specialized. I was looking for a way, obviously, to get it all done in one step, rather than straight flush cutting, and then having to set up another router table to try to cut the radius and all that. You still have to blend the top, but you get the radius all the way. Let me show you how this works. Get my dust collector going, and I'm going to make this pass. So again, I'm going to start, see how that bearing hits right up here, and then it's going to be spinning, and you can see how much I got overhanging here. The cutter's just going to come right in, and I'm going to just progress right down to the end. I got these locked down. It's against the stops, indexing off the bottom. We're ready to go. Check it out. So now, instead of all that process we went through on the other one, we created the contour of the leg and that sweet radius in one shot. So I just need to do a quick light card scraping and sand. Now the last thing we need to do is once the dovetail is then cut on here, it's brought up to the leg so you'll be able to see how you need to blend it. So I just do a little shaping right up here to blend it to the column. Let me show you another one. Here's a table that was made with this same technique. So this one happens to be mahogany, and it's the same dovetail technique. And these legs came right off this jig. And look at that shape. Now the last bit, I need to do a pencil line. It's a full 16th, so there's not a lot to take off there. And I just draw a little line and I blend it like right out into there. So it's a little bit of shaping, and it looks beautiful when it's done, and it takes less time. I should have mentioned, like, when I do this kind of project, I actually design my template with it being like a 16th heavy there and on the top. And after this is all shaped like this, I actually go to the crosscut sled and get this referenced on there with a stop to trim off here, and then I turn it and trim off the top. So you get a really beautiful, everything's uniform, and you get a nice square, flat, true surface. So even though I bandsawed this and this, these are just rough, a little over length to clean up later. I do, however, when I bandsaw, I did go right to the line on the foot. I took the line because the foot on this jig, and oftentimes on the chairs, the back legs, the bottom is the indexing point. So off of the jig, so the bottom hits. So when you're on one side of the cut, on the profile cutting, on the router table or whatever, your bottom is referencing off the indexing point. Then when it moves to the other one, again, the bottom references. So it's a little oversized at the top still. That gets trimmed later. But all of this will be nicely shaped and worked out. So that's basically the process of a small table, jigs for making curved legs, on small tables. All right, well, thank you so much for hanging out with me tonight. I hope you had as much fun as I did. It's really good to be back with you. And remember, if you enjoy this content, go ahead and subscribe and be our insider friend. So you'll know when all our new videos are posted. That happens when you ring that bell too. And also check out our website at epicwoodworking.com for drawings and courses and all that fun stuff. And if you want to really be an insider, you can join our mailing list there. And I look forward to seeing you next time right back here on Shop Night Live. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys. We're looking forward to Tuesday night. If you join us, we'll see you then. Otherwise, we'll see you next Thursday. Have a great weekend.